We're going to be talking about the last episode of the Disney Gallery series, focusing on The Mandalorian. The title of this episode was Connections. But I think it'd be interesting at this point, too, if we want to talk about the Disney Gallery Mandalorian series in total or in its totality, because now that we've seen all of them and they're all kind of assembled, obviously we want to talk about this particular one, but let's just go ahead and feel free to talk about it in whole. Now, obviously, this is on Disney Plus, so hopefully most of you have gotten a chance to watch it. I found all of them to be very, very interesting. I found this one to be interesting too, and I'm very curious to get Eric's take on this particular one with Connections. So let me just go ahead and say I really enjoyed this episode. I don't want to get too further into that until we get Eric's thoughts, and then we'll kind of go into it. So what did you think about this latest episode of this Disney Gallery Mandalorian series?
Honestly, it might be my favorite. I think it might be my favorite episode, and I really didn't expect that. So I think I went in with low expectations. I thought that this episode might kind of rehash Legacy a little bit and maybe not really give us anything new. It might be kind of like, I even remember last episode I said, what does that even mean, Connections exactly? But basically, a lot of it is it's an Easter egg episode. So I did like that, and it was interesting. But there were some revelations in this one that I really enjoyed. And I'm going to get my one bit of negativity out of the way. Right at the top. Kathleen Kennedy has very little role in this. Score would have been my favorite. You know what I mean? Because Kathleen Kennedy's not in it. She is in this one, but she doesn't really do anything. I think she has one line. So I am going to put that out there. That wasn't the reason that I enjoyed this episode. Although, once again, I will say, Dave, why is she there? I don't think she contributed anything of relevance. And it's very clear, by the way, because you mentioned talking about the show in totality. What did Kathleen Kennedy do?
Well, I mean, obviously in her producer role, she helped, facilitate, this particular production. But beyond that, I don't know. I would find.
I imagine in the show, just tell us what she did, what she contributed. Hey, I did this, I did that. That was my idea. You know what I mean?
I do. I do feel like her being in this is an attempt to recast her in a positive light by associating her with the Mandalorian, because I think she's taken so much flack because of some of the Disney War era films. So I do think her being in these is a very intentional thing to try and recast her in a positive light. But beyond that, you're right. I don't feel like, as far as, when you want to actually get into the meat of the episodes in which she's in, like as a commentator, in my humble opinion, I don't think she really contributes much to the conversation at all. So, and I preface my comments a little bit differently if I thought there was any chance of me ever working on Star Wars. But let's be honest, it's never going to happen, folks. Well,
I do want to say this, because I think you made a very interesting point. In that there's a reputation that Kathleen Kennedy has ever since George Lucas left, that she's very much a micromanager, and that she's very much like a her way or the highway. In fact, numerous directors have been fired from Star Wars since her tenure started, and that's just a fact. And that's where the rumors come from, that she's sort of like, she's very hard nosed, and that you do it my way or else. And I do see the contrast in this entire series, now having seen all the episodes, where now she's showing like, see, I can be laid back. I can let somebody else be in control. See, I don't have to be the center of attention. And I realized that could have been deliberate. That's actually good marketing, and that's good spin, as far as putting that out there, that, see, Favreau's the one calling the shots. I'm allowing him creative freedom. I can work with other directors. I can let them shine. I think you really hit something there, Dave. I really do. I think that was intentional. I think that's intentional, because obviously this series is very much meant to market The Mandalorian, and also to help bring in a lot of the alienated fans into Star Wars. That's very clear. That's why I always talk about the Lucas loyalists. Right up to the end, Filoni is talking about things, Favreau is talking about things, always about Lucas. The Lucas loyalists, I mean, they're there. There's no doubt about it.
Yeah, and and along these lines, let me just go ahead and I gotta hit this one on, just come at this one straight on. I don't think this is my favorite of these episodes, but this is the one where I almost had kind of an emotional reaction, which I was kind of surprised at, because I haven't really felt that with any of the other. Like, I've enjoyed them a lot, but I haven't had like a really visceral emotional reaction. And I actually found myself really kind of touched and thought it was really kind of cool. And for those of you who haven't seen it, spoiler alert, a lot of the stormtroopers that we see in the last episode are actually 501st. And I thought that
I had the same reaction. I had the same reaction. Yeah. That's why it's my favorite episode, actually. That's exactly why it's my favorite episode.
And it was just so cool to see that. And it was neat too, because when they've got their helmets off, there's women there, there's men there, there's younger, there's older, and it's just it just made me feel good to realize that there's all these Star Wars fans getting to live out their dream of being in Star Wars, as a part of the Mandalorian. I just thought that was so cool. And then when you take that even a step further, and as you're going through the episode, as they lead up to revealing that the 501st are the stormtroopers, the other thing that was really interesting too is that besides the connections, one of the neatest things I thought about this was when Favreau was talking about it, and they wanted to have more stormtroopers in the scene, and they weren't sure how they were going to do it because they only had so many costumes, and they didn't have the budget to do what they wanted to do. And then he and Filoni kind of had this similar idea. It's like, well, let's see if we can get the 501st to come out and do this. And it was just so amazing. And if Favreau was talking about, this is when I had my emotional reaction. When Favreau was talking about, he's like, that they didn't really have to coach them on how to be stormtroopers, because they're doing all these events at hospitals, and they're doing these events at movie premieres, and they've studied it, and they're into it, and they know how to be stormtroopers. And then he says they are stormtroopers. And I was shocked that I had an emotional reaction watching this. And I kept thinking about, wow, that must be so amazing. You're a Star Wars fan, and you do, charity stuff with the 501st, to embrace your love of Star Wars, and you're really into it. And I was just imagining how magical it must be. You get this call to go do this event. You're not even sure what it is, but it's coming directly from Lucasfilm. So obviously you show up, and you're getting bussed in, and all of a sudden you turn the corner and you realize, wait a minute, am I going to be in Star Wars? That's it. Right. I can't imagine that. That was so amazing. So that, I said, I had a very emotional reaction to it.
That's absolutely the highlight of the episode. It's like, okay, we're done, I guess. You know what I mean? That's absolutely the reason that I love this episode. It's because of that revelation. I had no idea that the 501st was involved in this production in any way, shape, or form. I have a lot of history of dealing with the 501st when I was staff on Phoenix Comic-Con, and we used to deal with the local group, which is the Dune Sea Garrison. And one of my close friend of mine actually eventually was the executive officer for the Dune Sea Garrison, the local Arizona chapter of the 501st. He was actually their one and only snowtrooper for a long time. He actually had a snowtrooper outfit, so that was sort of his little claim to fame within the group. I used to work with those guys all the time. I used to talk to them, lead ups to the convention. We would meet with them and try to figure out events. One of the first events we ever did was a costume contest. We didn't even call it a masquerade. It was a costume contest. And we had one of the members of the 501st as our MC. And that continued for years. He continued emceeing the masquerade. In fact, I don't know if he might still do it. I haven't gone to the masquerade for Phoenix Comic-Con in a long time, or Phoenix fan, whatever it is now. But I'm no longer associated with that event in any official capacity. But I was at the one time. I was on staff. And I think he was still doing that at least until the last couple of years. He's still been doing it. He goes out there into stormtrooper armor, but he takes the helmet off and he MCs the masquerade. So, there's that history there where I used to deal with them all the time. I used to see them at events all the time. San Diego Comic-Con, they were always very prevalent there as well. And you got to talk to these guys. Obviously they're fans, and they're just a diverse, really interesting group of people. And the fact that they were actually allowed to participate in this, Filoni makes a great point, which is that like for them, having anything that's screen used is like the best thing ever. You know what I mean? If they have like a screen used prop, either as part of their costume or they have one of the blasters or something like that, that is like the end all and be all to them, because that's like the holy grail. It's like, this was actually on screen. This was actually used in Star Wars and it's part of my costume. Well, now every single one of those guys and gals that participated in The Mandalorian can say that. Every single one of their costumes and their props are screen used. That's a huge cred in that community, and that's a huge cred for anybody that's into that kind of stuff. It's like every single one of their uniforms now is screen used. It's official Star Wars. And that's, like you said, I even talking about it right now, I get that emotional reaction because I understand that as a fan, what that means to fans, that they have that connection. I don't think I'll ever have a screen used prop of Star Wars ever, probably in my lifetime, unless I become very independently wealthy and I decide to go on some sort of binge, But now every single one of these guys and gals, they have that. They have, screen used props from the Mandalorian. So that's absolutely the reason that I think that this is the best episode. It's just for that fact alone. Just the fact that I didn't know that, so it was a big revelation for me. I had no idea that happened, and the fact that they actually did that, I just think is awesome. I mean, it really shows you how Filoni and Favre operate, how they think, and how different they are from everybody else, to be honest with you. I don't think J.J. Abrams would have ever done this. You know what I mean? One thing I will say, kind of backing up to the beginning of the episode, and it kind of relates to this, is they talked about this notion that they are sort of the little brothers of Star Wars playing with their older brother's toys. And they're specifically talking about the films. They're talking about JJ. They're talking about Rian Johnson. They're talking about all those people. Those are the older brothers. They get all the good stuff. Okay, they get all the good stuff. And basically they're playing with all the used stuff. They even made the analogy that they have the Boba Fett figure and they repainted him. That's who the Mandalorian is. He's a repainted Boba Fett figure. Right. And I love that. I love that kind of stuff, that they acknowledge that's exactly what they're doing. They acknowledge directly, the fact that the creatures that they're riding on and things, they come from the Ewok special. They made a point of that yes, they come from the Ewok special. That's where they come from. Things like that, I appreciate a lot as a fan. And I just think it's so cool that they're talking about that we're the guys basically using everybody else's toys. In fact, one of the other revelations was that the TIE fighter scene, not the TIE fighter, the X-Wing fighter scene, where the X-Wings come in and actually destroy that station that the Mandalorian has been on. They borrowed that from Galaxy's Edge. They didn't even have a X-Wing cockpit. They had to borrow the one that's actually displayed outdoors. So it's not even meant to be a film prop. They use that. And it really makes me appreciate the fact that they're able to do this when they are the little brothers playing with their older brothers' toys, because for the most part, I think their older brothers suck. And I think their Star Wars sucks. The one exception is Rogue One. I think Rogue One is excellent. Love that movie. I own it. The rest of Disney Wars, in my opinion, is terrible. And it's just amazing to me that they took, the hand-me-downs of all that, and came up with a much better product, in my opinion, a much better product.
Yeah, I thought it was really cool too when they were talking about actually that X-Wing sequence, and one of the things I really enjoyed was the fact that Favreau was so animated, because he's like that's just like what they would have had in the 70s, and you could just see his excitement, and that's the thing that's really neat. That's the thing I've loved most about this, is realizing that everyone associated with The Mandalorian, because to me, with the exception of Rogue One, because I agree with you, I quite like Rogue One, and I enjoyed Force Awakens. I didn't hate Force Awakens, but Mandalorian for me is up there with Rogue One as being probably the best of the new Star Wars that they've done. And for me, I just love the idea of knowing that there's so many people that just love Star Wars that are fans that worked on it, and to see especially Favreau his excitement and hearing Filoni talk about, the connections to things. One of the other things I loved too in this special was when Favreau was talking about the gun that the Mandalorian uses that has the tuning fork looking end on it. He was talking about he was so excited he couldn't wait to tell George Lucas. It's like, yeah, we took that from the holiday special, and because you wrote that, it's canon. And Lucas is like, I had nothing to do with that. That was so funny. And they have video of that on set, and Lucas is like, he's sitting there, he's like, I didn't do anything on that at all. I had nothing to do with that. I thought that was absolutely hilarious. So
I think that might be a little bit of revisionism by George Lucas, by the way. That might be a little bit of select memory that's going on.
I just enjoyed that moment, like as the comedy levity moment within the series. I thought that was really funny because, for example, I can think of many instances where I, even as a comic professional, have been really excited about something that someone worked on. And then you run up to them at a convention, or you bump into them to like an after hours mixer for other professionals or something. And you're like, hey, I really like that thing you worked on back in the day. I thought it was awesome. And they tell you this story, like, oh, it sucked. And I wish I hadn't this, or I didn't really have that much to do with that. Or, this kind of shrug it off. It's like, and then you feel kind of weird. So it just helped me relate and click with Favreau even more, because I've kind of been there, where I was like, hey, we did this tie-in to this one thing, and I worked into the book because I love this. And they're like, oh, I didn't really have much to do with that. Why did you do that? And so, I've kind of been there. So I thought that was kind of funny and fun. And I thought it was cool too.
I totally get that as well, because in going to events and things like that, I used to go to the Writers Guild, the animation. It was the Animation Writers Caucus of the Writers Guild. I used to go to their reception every year at San Diego Comic-Con, and there's all sorts of stories like that. I mean, it's just a very common thing. If people are honest, and a lot of times they'll just tell you, you're like this. Oh, I love this. I love this. And like, yeah, I had nothing to do with that. You know what I mean? I had absolutely nothing to do with that. It wasn't me. You know what I mean? It's like, I'm glad you like that, but it's not me. It wasn't me. So I've heard that story many, many a time.
So just as a quick aside, did you ever meet or talk to Michael Reeves?
I don't think so, no.
Okay. All right. I decided to ask. I love Michael Reeves stuff that he's done, particularly in animation. He does a lot of interesting stories where he's constantly revisiting the concept of AI and kind of humanity, obviously within an animation concept. I think probably some of his best stuff that people would be familiar with is he did a lot of the hard act stuff that actually led to the robot Batman that appears in Batman the Animated Series. A lot of those ideas are Michael Reeves stuff, and so I just had to throw that out there because we never really talked about that before, and you mentioned it once before, and I was just like, "Did you ever talk to Michael Reeves?" Because every time I talk to any animation professionals, I'm always bringing up Michael Reeves, like "Have you talked to Michael Reeves?" Because I'm such a huge fan. So anyhow,
gotcha.
Well, so we've talked about this particular episode, and I don't want to get into everything that they did in it, because I think it'd be fun for people to obviously watch it and revisit it. But there's all kinds of stuff that they brought from, classic Star Wars and even some of the newer productions like Rogue One that's all over the Mandalorian, which is really fun and cool to see. But I think we should also just talk about, now that we've seen all of the episodes, I think we should just talk about just the Mandalorian in total, like as a series, as an 8-part series. I found this to be very interesting, and I'd highly recommend it for anyone who's interested in process or just likes the Mandalorian or likes Star Wars. Especially if you have a Disney Plus, subscription, you're probably looking for some way to get your money's worth out of it anyway. Lord knows I am, because I don't know, I'm just not watching that much stuff on it, and being able to come back and watch this every week has been a lot of fun, and I've really, really enjoyed being able to watch these. And then beyond that, there's some really, really great stuff in here. I think the one about the score was really interesting. This one I think is a highlight or a standout for me too. as well as the one where they talk about sort of the concept and how they prevised. Of course, we talked about the volume, the video wall. They talk about that just briefly. They touch on that when they talk about how they recreated the cantina from the original Star Wars, which that was very interesting. How much how much loving attention to detail. It's if you're a Star Wars fan, if you love process, I'd say this is one of the more interesting ones I've seen like this. It's kind of a behind the scenes. It's a lot of fun. I don't think it's quite as dishy or in depth as, for example, like if you have the Aliens quadrilogy, I think they called it, set where they break down every single one of the Aliens films. Those are terribly interesting too. But this is one of the better ones if you're interested in behind the scenes stuff. I found this to be really interesting, and I highly, highly recommend it. So tell me, Eric, how do you feel about this as a whole and total? How do you feel about this series?
I think it started a little slow for me, but I definitely think it ended on a great note. The last two episodes are, in particular, really stand out to me. The previous episode to this one's score is very unique. We talked about that in our review last week because it really does a spotlight focus specifically on the person who came up with the score for The Mandalorian. So it's very unique. All the other episodes, they basically go back and forth between two roundtables. One of the roundtables is the directors. So it's all the directors sitting around a table talking. The other one is basically Favreau and Filoni talking with the visual effects person. And then, as I've mentioned, Kathleen Kennedy is just there for some reason that we don't know. Bobby Chambers had a comment earlier. It says, "We know what you did, Kennedy." So I'll just leave it there. But most of the episodes, that's what they do, including this last one, actually. They just alternate between those two different roundtables. But in the score episode, they actually just have a roundtable, which is just Favreau, Filoni, and the composer. So it's very different. So it definitely stands out. As I mentioned, some of the earlier episodes, I just wasn't as into. That's not because I don't have any interest, in the directing process. I do have an interest in it. And then, Legacy had some good moments as well. I will say Legacy had some really good moments. Like Filoni's monologue about the importance of basically Lucas's vision, and really he did this kind of intense defense of episode 1. If you're really interested in episode 1 and you're one of those people that really like it, you're going to like what Filoni had to say about that film in that particular episode. But it definitely for me got stronger as it went on, because the thing that I was really interested in was the technical aspects. You talked about that visual wall. That technology just seems incredibly interesting to me. I keep thinking, and that's going to come into our discussion of RoboCop later when we talk about RoboCop. I keep thinking about the idea of combining stop motion with one of those projection walls, and if that would work. Because there's so many films where you see where they combine stop motion with live action, and it looks kind of fake. It doesn't look right. And I keep thinking in my head, I wonder if that would look better if you incorporated one of those digital walls. And it's like, maybe someday I'll have the budget to try that, because I think that would be an interesting idea. Or even an interesting way to remaster a film would be to do something like that. But anyway, there's a lot of good aspects to this series, especially if you're interested in filmmaking. If you're not that interested in filmmaking, this last episode is the one for you. If you just want to know about the Easter eggs and that's what you're interested in, then you can just watch the last episode. Just watch Connections. Maybe watch some of Legacy. Legacy might help you out too if you're just not really that into the process. You don't really care about the technology. I think those two episodes will stand out as a fan. In particular, I don't think we can emphasize it enough that 501st moment. There's some other really cool moments in this last episode. But if you're just a fan and you're just kind of interested in knowing, where are the Easter eggs? What are they all about? Maybe you're more of a casual fan. And for instance, you're not even familiar with the holiday special. You're not familiar with the Ewok adventure and the Battle for Endor. You're just not familiar with that stuff. They'll kind of key you in to, what that's all about. Because some of the Easter eggs are obviously much more obvious than others. I will put out there that one of the ones that I thought was really cool was the droid from the first Star Wars, the original Star Wars movie, the one with the bad motivator. They actually put him in the Mandalorian, and I didn't realize that. I thought it was a droid that just looked like him. So that's one revelation that I'll give out there that I thought was really interesting. Was they think that's actually him. That's actually the same droid. He's been stuck on Tatooine this entire time, and he's sitting there in the bar. Oh, and the other thing that I thought was neat that they talked about was and it relates to that, is if you recall in the original Star Wars film, the droids were not allowed to go into the bar, but now the droids are running the bar, which I thought that was a neat thing. I didn't catch that when I watched The Mandalorian. It's like, oh, that's true. That's true. Like before, droids were not allowed to go into the cantina on Tatooine. Now they're running it. So I thought that was a neat revelation as well.
It was interesting, and the assertion that maybe the droids now run the bar. I thought that was interesting. That they might even own the bar.
Probably not the poor. What is that droid? I always forget his name. The one from the original Star Wars. I always forget his name. The one that has the bad motivator and it pops up and stuff like that. The one that almost could have been R2. He could have taken his place.
I thought it was
R4.
Yeah,
I thought R4 was Obi-Wan Kenobi's droid.
Oh, was it? Maybe it was.
Gets his head chopped off. Remember the droid that gets his head chopped off in Attack of the Clones? I think it's similar, though. I think it is an R or something like that. My brother actually had that toy. I remember that toy. He had it right next to his R2-D2 because I didn't have either one of them, and he had both of them. And he actually had the Sandcrawler set. The one that had the paper sandcrawler in the background.
Yeah.
And so he used to always have them set up like that. But I just think it's funny that poor droid is still stuck on Tatooine, and now he's just basically like a waiter or something like that.
Right.
And I didn't catch that. I thought it was just a droid that looked like him. So I thought that
was interesting, and that's what I'm talking about. Watching it, I thought it was very interesting how they showed, and again, the title says this, the connections, about how they went through and they found all these interesting ways to tie all these different disparate elements into the Mandalorian. So it's a celebration of Star Wars. They talked about the personnel carrier, which was just a toy.
Mm-hmm.
Remember when I saw the Mandalorian, about jumped off out of my skin when I saw that, because that was so cool. Because I didn't have the personal carrier, but I had a friend who had it. We used to use that thing all the time. So it was just really.
I remember people being like, "What the hell is this?" That's what I remember growing up. Is because people were like, "This isn't in the movie. What the hell is this thing?" You know what I mean? People being like, but there were a lot of vehicles like that, especially like the smaller vehicles. You know what I mean? Which were more affordable. So a lot of kids had them, and we would be looking at them like, "This is never in the movie." You know what I mean? Like, what the hell is this thing? But they put it in. Right. They went ahead and put it in, and they made it canon. You know what I mean? So I think that's kind of funny. I think that's cool.
But no, yeah, like I said, I highly, highly recommend this series on Disney Plus. It was really, really interesting, and I think it's totally worth the investment and time to watch, especially if you're into behind the scenes stuff. If you really like The Mandalorian. Or if you're just a big Star Wars fan, you're looking for something kind of fun and kind of new. I think for a lot of us, there's a lot of fun things to discover or even rediscover here. I did think it was interesting that a lot of the things they're calling back to, whether you want to talk about Ewok Adventure or you want to talk about the holiday special, that these things are not available on Disney Plus. So I did think that was interesting that they're highlighting things that basically, as far as I know. I could be wrong, but as far as I know, I think the only way you can actually get some of this stuff would have been back in the day at a convention, back in that dark corner or that back corner where there's that guy selling all those bootlegs. Like that's where you go to get your Ewok Adventure. That's where you go to get your copy of the holiday special, the Roger Corman Fantastic Four, that horrible Justice League Friends comedy TV pilot. Like, that's where you had to go. And it's interesting too, because there was also back in those days, they just had a lot of stuff back in those little bootleg corners that you just couldn't get any other way. there's still a lot of episodes of Super Friends, for example, that the only way I saw some of those is because that's what I used to do back in the day. I didn't buy a lot of them, but I did. I specifically went back there one time to get a copy of Roger Corman's Fantastic Four because I really wanted to see it. And then I found some Super Friends, and that was the main thing I used to get from these bootleg guys because they had all the Super Friends stuff on VHS, and there was no other way to watch Super Friends. It wasn't in reruns at the time. There weren't any sets out that you could buy. I mean, there was just none of that stuff. So it's just kind of interesting that they're kind of talking about things that you can't even watch on Disney Plus. So I wonder if there might be an initiative after this, at least with maybe Ewok Adventure and maybe Caravan of Courage, about maybe actually trying to clean up the negatives or whatever, if they can find that, of those films and kind of represent them and actually, make them available on Disney Plus maybe down the road.
Yeah, I would definitely like that, especially the holiday special, because the only time I've ever seen the holiday special is my bootleg copy of the holiday special, which is basically just somebody who recorded it on a VHS and then put it on a DVD. And Bobby Chambers says the dark corner of the convention, quote unquote. This had my wife and I laughing. It's so true. Yeah, we all remember those days. The Ewok Adventure and the Battle for Endor were both released on DVD. They've never been released on Blu-ray. There were official releases of that. But the holiday special has never been released officially. George Lucas basically vowed that would never happen. But hey, he doesn't own the company anymore, so now we can have it. So come on, Disney Plus. Let's get the holiday special. Let's get the Ewok Adventure. Let's get the Battle for Endor. Also, the one thing I really is like, where's the Ewok cartoon? Where's the Droids cartoon?
Yeah.
That difficult to put those on Disney Plus. It's like, I don't understand a lot of that. So I don't know if they maybe want to, maybe there's some possibility of them maybe wanting to remaster it. I do know with the Droids TV series, because I have a copy of the DVD, which the DVD, what it did was it took like two different stories that were separate episodes and made them into like mini movies. So they're very highly edited. They're not the way they were broadcast. And they took out the Stuart Copeland song, Trouble Again, I think is what it's called, the sort of infamous theme of the Droids series, because I think there are rights issues. They don't want to pay him. They don't want to pay him. Right. He probably had a premium contract that basically gave him all sorts of residuals and stuff like that, and they don't want to pay him. And that stuff annoys the heck out of me because I don't like that. I like the original music as it was when I first saw the show, There's another famous example of that some people, it's kind of obscure, but Tour of Duty did that. Tour of Duty had this amazing soundtrack that was like a who's who of like 70s, late 60s music. And if you've ever seen it on TV ever again, or if you even got the DVD copy, none of that music's in it. It has the most bland, just they inserted some soundtrack into it, and it's terrible. So I wouldn't want to see that happen. I wouldn't want to see that happen to Droids or any of these other shows or something like that. Sometimes that's the issue. The music, really, it's the music sometimes is the issue. They just don't want to pay the composer because they usually have some pretty good deals as far as residuals, and they just don't want to deal with it. But I would like to see all those things on Disney Plus. I think that would be fun, and I don't think there's much reason not to. I'm speculating on why they won't do it. I think a lot of it has to do with kind of burying that legacy. Maybe they're quote unquote embarrassed by it, But Favreau's not. Favreau embraces it. Again, he's fine playing with his older brother's toys. It's like that. That I think in a way it's very liberating for him because he feels a lot less pressure than a lot of the other folks do, which is ironic because when you think about it, Disney Plus is pretty much made by The Mandalorian. I don't think Disney Plus would be anywhere near where it is right now as far as subscriptions if it wasn't for The Mandalorian. It's the reason I got it. And quite frankly, I'll probably get rid of it, at least until the Mandalorian comes back. So, I mean, it got me in, and I think it's pretty much the cornerstone of the entire service. And so it's kind of funny that Favreau just seems to have this very playful attitude that, hey, we're just going to kind of do whatever we think is cool. We're going to take all this obscure stuff. We're going to throw it in there, and somehow we're going to make it work, which I think they did.